Mass deportations sweeping across Europe? Is the continent closing its doors to migrants for good? In a world where borders are tightening and policies are shifting, Europe's immigration crackdown is making headlines and sparking heated debates. From Sweden to Germany and Denmark to France, countries are ramping up efforts to deport those without legal residency. But what's driving this wave of mass deportations? And more importantly, what does it mean for the future of Europe and the millions affected by these policies? You're watching Elite Global Watch, where we simplify the complex and reveal the hidden. In this video, we'll take a deep dive into Europe's controversial immigration crackdown, exploring the policies, the politics, and the people caught in the middle. Stay tuned, because this is a story you need to know. Historical context. To understand Europe's current immigration crackdown, we need to rewind the clock. Over the past 2 decades, Europe has seen waves of migration, each one reshaping the continent's policies and political landscape. In 2015, Europe faced its largest migration crisis since World War II. Over 1 million people fled conflict zones like Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, seeking refuge in European nations. The sudden influx overwhelmed asylum systems, sparking political turmoil and dividing public opinion. While some nations like Germany initially opened their doors, declaring "we can do this," others pushed back, fearing the strain on resources and social cohesion. This crisis didn't just challenge Europe's unity, it reshaped its politics. The rise of nationalist and right-wing populist parties swept through countries like Hungary, Italy, and France, driven by promises to protect borders and take back control. These movements turned immigration into a central political battleground, calling for stricter policies and faster deportations. In response, Europe began tightening its asylum laws. Over the years, deportations increased, borders were reinforced, and policies grew harsher. Today, what began as a response to a crisis has become a cornerstone of political strategy across the continent. But how did we go from welcoming refugees to mass deportations? To answer that, we need to look at what's happening now, where policies are shifting faster than ever. Current deportation policies in Europe. Europe's deportation policies are no longer just about border control, they're reshaping the continent's approach to migration entirely. Let's take a closer look at some of the most striking developments across Europe. Starting with Sweden, a country once known for its generosity toward migrants. Now, it's singing a different tune. In 2024, Sweden approved the lowest number of asylum applications in 25 years. What's more, they've introduced financial incentives, offering migrants up to $34,000 to voluntarily return to their home countries. Supporters say it's a compassionate exit, but critics call it a bribe to clear the books. Denmark, meanwhile, is pursuing some of the most hardline immigration policies in Europe. The government's ambitious goal? Zero asylum seekers. To achieve this, they're exploring offshoring deportation centers in countries like Rwanda, where migrants would be processed and sent back. It's a controversial move that's drawn both praise and condemnation for its boldness. Over in Germany, the focus is on security. The government has resumed deportations to high-risk countries, including Afghanistan, following violent incidents linked to undocumented migrants. While some argue these policies are essential to maintain public safety, others question the ethics of returning people to conflict zones. In France, new immigration laws are making headlines. The government has extended detention periods for undocumented migrants, giving authorities more time to process deportations. While officials claim these measures are necessary to tackle illegal migration, human rights groups warn of potential abuses and overcrowded detention centers. And then there's Frontex, the EU's border agency. Frontex is coordinating deportation efforts across Europe, organizing joint flights to repatriate thousands of migrants. This reflects a growing push for unity among EU nations, but it also raises uncomfortable questions about the balance between border control and human rights. Across Europe, these policies represent a significant shift, one that's affecting not just migrants but the values Europe claims to uphold. As deportations ramp up, so does the debate. Is this a solution to migration challenges, or a dangerous precedent? The human impact. Behind every policy, every statistic, there's a human story. And when it comes to deportations, these stories are often heartbreaking. Take Amina, a mother of 3 from Afghanistan. She fled the violence in her home country, seeking safety in Germany. But after her asylum claim was denied, she was told she and her children must return, back to the same dangers they had escaped. For families like Amina's, deportation isn't just a policy, it's a life-altering decision. Then there are the children, born and raised in Europe, who suddenly find themselves uprooted. In Sweden, deportations have separated families, sending parents back to conflict zones while their children remain in foster care. Critics argue that these policies disregard the psychological trauma inflicted on the youngest and most vulnerable. And it's not just about deportations, it's about the conditions leading up to them. In France, detention centers are becoming overcrowded as the government extends the time migrants can be held. Reports of poor living conditions and inadequate access to legal assistance have sparked outrage among human rights organizations. Statistics paint a grim picture. Since 2015, over 1 million people have been deported from Europe. And according to Amnesty International, 60% of deportees are sent back to countries where their safety cannot be guaranteed. Critics argue that Europe's deportation policies prioritize border control over basic human rights. They question whether it's ethical to send people back to war zones, to poverty, or to persecution. As one activist put it, deportation doesn't solve migration, it simply moves the problem elsewhere. But governments defending these policies say they're necessary to maintain order and protect resources for those who are legally eligible to stay. It's a balancing act, but at what cost? For every deportation, there's a human story, one of hope, fear, and resilience. And these stories remind us that the debate over immigration is more than just politics, it's about people. Political and social motivations. Europe's stricter immigration policies aren't just a response to migrant numbers. They're deeply rooted in political shifts and social tensions that have reshaped the continent over the past decade. The rise of right-wing populism. Across Europe, the rise of right-wing populism has brought immigration to the forefront of political debate. Parties once on the fringe, like the National Rally in France and the League in Italy, are now shaping national policy. Their message is clear: immigration threatens national identity and security. And for millions of voters, this rhetoric strikes a chord. In Hungary, Viktor Orban's government has even declared immigration as poison. Elsewhere, politicians promise to take back control by tightening borders and increasing deportations. But this isn't just political posturing, it's a strategy that's winning elections and forcing mainstream parties to adopt tougher stances. Economic concerns and national security. Then there's the economy. With aging populations and rising unemployment, many European countries fear the economic strain of integrating migrants. Critics argue that public resources, housing, healthcare, education, are already stretched too thin. Meanwhile, governments claim that stricter immigration policies are needed to protect their citizens' access to these resources. And let's not forget national security. In the wake of terrorist attacks and rising concerns about undocumented migration, leaders have doubled down on the narrative that stricter border controls equal greater safety. While evidence linking migrants to insecurity is mixed at best, the rhetoric remains a powerful tool in shaping public opinion. Cultural tensions and divisions. But the debate over immigration isn't just about numbers or safety, it's about culture. Many Europeans fear that large-scale migration threatens their traditions, languages, and ways of life. This fear, often amplified by sensational media coverage, creates a stark divide. Urban centers tend to embrace diversity, while rural areas push back. This cultural clash is fueling resentment and hardening opinions. Immigration has become a lightning rod for deeper anxieties about globalization and societal change, forcing leaders to navigate a landscape where compromise seems increasingly impossible. Shaping Europe's political discourse, stricter immigration policies aren't just changing the lives of migrants, they're redefining Europe's political landscape. Immigration is now a central issue in elections, shaping platforms and dividing voters. For some, these policies symbolize a necessary step to preserve Europe's stability. For others, they're a betrayal of the continent's humanitarian ideals. As Europe's governments double down on deportations, the divide between open and closed societies grows wider. And with each new policy, the stakes for migrants and for Europe's future only become higher. So, what do these policies mean for Europe's global reputation and its ability to address migration in the future? Let's explore the broader implications of this immigration crackdown. Broader implications. Europe's crackdown on immigration doesn't just affect the people being deported, it's reshaping the continent's global image, its relationships with other nations, and even its own future. Impact on Europe's global image. Europe has long positioned itself as a champion of human rights, a beacon of democracy and compassion. But with mass deportations and hardline immigration policies making headlines, this reputation is coming under fire. Critics argue that these policies undermine Europe's core values, sending a message that the continent is closing its doors to those in need. International organizations have condemned deportations to unsafe countries, raising questions about whether Europe is prioritizing border control over basic human rights. And it's not just human rights advocates raising alarms. European policies are also straining relationships with migrant-sending nations, particularly in Africa and the Middle East. Deportations to fragile states like Afghanistan or Somalia risk destabilizing regions already grappling with conflict and poverty. Will these measures deter migration? One of the main arguments for stricter deportation policies is that they'll act as a deterrent, sending a clear message to would-be migrants that irregular entry won't be tolerated. But does this strategy actually work? Evidence suggests otherwise. Despite tougher policies, migration flows remain resilient. Desperation drives people to risk everything, even knowing the odds are stacked against them. Smugglers adapt, creating more dangerous and expensive routes that put lives at greater risk. Instead of solving the issue, critics warn these measures may fuel a vicious cycle, pushing migrants into even more precarious situations and empowering criminal networks profiting from human trafficking. Challenges on the horizon. Europe's immigration policies also come with unintended consequences closer to home. With an aging population and shrinking workforce, many nations face a looming economic crisis. Migrants, often young and ready to work, could fill critical gaps in sectors like healthcare, agriculture, and technology. But restrictive policies risk shutting out this potential lifeline. Meanwhile, as climate change accelerates, migration pressures are only expected to grow. Rising sea levels, extreme weather, and resource scarcity will drive millions to seek safety. Europe's current approach may struggle to handle this new wave of climate refugees. What's next for European immigration? So, where does Europe go from here? Experts predict that immigration will remain one of the continent's most divisive issues, shaping elections, policies, and public opinion for years to come. Some believe Europe will double down on deportations, aiming for even tighter border controls and stricter asylum laws. Others argue for a more balanced approach, one that recognizes migration as an opportunity, not just a challenge. But one thing is clear: Europe's immigration policies don't just define its borders, they reflect its values. And the choices made today will shape the Europe of tomorrow. As the debate rages on, the question remains: is Europe's immigration crackdown a step toward stability, or a path to deeper division? In conclusion, we've taken a deep dive into Europe's immigration crackdown, exploring the policies shaping deportations, the human stories behind the headlines, and the broader implications for the continent and the world. From Sweden to Germany and Denmark to France, Europe's approach to immigration is changing fast. These policies are raising tough questions about human rights, national security, and the very identity of Europe itself. So, what do you think? Are these policies necessary to maintain order and stability, or are they a step too far, undermining the values Europe claims to uphold? We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments and join the conversation. And don't forget, your voice matters. If you found this video insightful, give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on global issues that matter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the stories shaping our world.